Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. What a great segment that was. And this is going to be a great segment also. As I said, we're doing two books today. That was about TV news anchors. This one about the NYPD, probably in a way that you have never seen it or heard it because or heard about it, because this book is an inside look at a police officer's career who ultimately worked at the 52nd Precinct. So let me welcome in retired NYPD police officer Luis Rivera. Nice to see you, Luis.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And you are the author of The 52nd. This is a very detailed work. I mean, and it goes way back. At what point in your life or in your career did you say, hey, I ought to write a book? Because there's a lot in here that recounts a lot of what you did. When did you say, hey, this deserves a book?
Well, it's kind of weird because most people do a book like a year or 2 years after they're retired, but it took a few years. I actually, because I was doing other writings elsewhere, and I said, I should write something of my experience, especially growing up, wanting to become a cop. And sure enough, I asked my wife, what do you think? And she said, go for it, and that's exactly what I did. And there it is.
So had you been a writer beforehand,
No,
or
no, I was writing other stuff.
so you were a
Uh,
writer then?
well, I I would.
Maybe not formally.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
And what about, just before we get into some of the things in the book, what about the writing of it? Was it difficult to remember a lot of stuff? Did you did you have to sit there and really kick yourself and say, hey,
Oh, I had to
what
go.
happened? Or is so much of it, front and center in your memory that it was easy to kind of spit it out, quote unquote, spit it out?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. It was front and center memories, and I had to go back to my what we call the memo book, where we write our daily logs and entries and stuff. So I had to go back way back in the '90s in that to kind of reflect on certain locations.
Yeah.
There it is.
And there it is. And so you worked at what I found was interesting. There were a number of things that I found fascinating. What I really found fascinating was the time it takes for a rookie cop to kind of get into it, because they don't want to put you out in the front lines in the most difficult spots. Of course, that would be dangerous for everybody.
Right.
But it did take years, really, for you to say, well, I was just a rookie cop, and so they kind of treated me like a rookie cop. And at big events I would be in charge of kind of standing there and watching the doors, so to speak, or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. But there is that moment where you found out that the department was not run by Boy Scouts, and your initial objective of being a police officer was to do the right thing, and you
Yes.
by and large did that, of course, your whole career. But that was that a hard thing to learn, and kind of like a child learns that, wow,
Well,
mommy and daddy may not be as great as we thought they
yeah,
were, kind of thing.
yeah, but I kind of expected that any treatment. I kind of expected it, and especially when they say, "Here, look at kid here. This is how we do this." I expected all that, and and I didn't expect any less. And in fact, I even welcomed that because that's what it is when you start at a low level position in any job. So I took my cue from the older guys, from the senior guys, and many guys were actually willing to help, and they did help me, and I learned a lot.
The the thing that came out, and I'm interested in this because you said, right. I mean, you're a Bronx boy and a New York City police officer, so you have no problem saying what you think. But you were pretty critical of people. Now, you didn't name some of the cops that you really thought had done the wrong thing, but
Right.
you talked about the drinking on the job and white cops. You made it very clear that there was racism out there, cops chasing women and all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious, have you gotten any feedback from either former colleagues or anybody who said, hey, wait a minute, you can't tell everybody about all this stuff that goes on?
Actually, no, but even that I may welcome and on an open forum anytime, because my objective to the book was not to name names or to pinpoint the negativity, but to explain in an overall view how some of the departments were, how some of the officers were, and now all officers were the same.
If you complain, I mean, these are things that those of us in the general public have heard about, right? We all have heard stories that happen in the NYPD. Of course, the bigger issues, of course, end up on on the front page of the Daily News or the New York Post. But you made it clear if you complain, you get red flagged, and the department labels you a problem child.
Yes.
And you've been through that. Can you ever get past that as a police officer? Can you ever earn your way back? Or there's so much infrastructure at the top and at the top of a precinct that they're like, all right, we don't want to give this guy any plum, assignments.
Yeah, I can speak for all officers, but I would say this: you do get over it, and you start developing your own methods of doing things on the job, and you choose and pick certain friends within the job and out of the job. But the most important thing is that I never went to a boss and say, hey, this is what's going on, because you never do that.
Because then you would really be labeled a problem child.
Exactly. So I took other avenues. I started hanging out more on my own. I was one to do, in the beginning, I was very active, but then it came to a time I said, you know what? I got to do the least, or at least the minimum that is required of me, which I did. And my favorite thing towards the end of my tour was hanging out and having my first drink.
So, well, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. And I thought this was really, really interesting, that if you are a police officer and you have issues, personal issues, and this is all I got out of the book,
right.
And you have personal issues for yourself, whether a problem in your marriage, financial problems, maybe you come from a difficult background. I mean, it could be anything. I mean, police officers are like the rest of us. We all got issues.
Yes.
That are unrelated, and you seek help for those, and you want to have those things not affect your performance when you're in the streets, and of course dealing with some of the most difficult issues out there. If you say that, then they label you as somebody unfit for office.
Correct.
That's got to be a difficult thing, because we all have issues. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, but you know what? You said it right. Unfit. Because the job doesn't really look out for the officer individually. The job looks out for, they make sure you got your numbers at that time, your numbers, your quota, and that you was carrying your load, your weight, so to speak, and that's it. And you kept it moving. And during the interim of that, or at least in my career, I did all that. I did the heavy drinking. I did the hanging out. My first marriage was on the rocks. And it's like your best friend was maybe the guy who was next to you at the bar drinking with you.
And so, as opposed to being able to say, even, hey, I need to talk to somebody. But the minute you do that, all of a sudden it kind of has some, effect on your job.
Correct.
And you listen, I'm just going to pull out a quote. The captain pretended to be a friend, but in the end, he became a backstabbing weasel. That's pretty strong stuff. And so I guess in addition to, I hate to put it this way, in addition to fighting crime and it's not only crime. Sometimes it's people wanting to jump off a building, and you've been there and you've saved those people.
Yes.
You've got to really take care of yourself. I mean, as a police officer, and work with people or be friends with people who you can really trust. Right? I mean, am I getting that right?
Yes. It's more like, at first you think that drinking is all the fun and the fun and games, and there you are. But as time goes on, and you have years under your belt, you start realizing and say, hey, wait a minute, I got to look out for myself, because no one is going to help me or look out for me in that sense. So in time, it's not that I try to put myself to get into issues, but I got into issues where it was beyond my control, that everybody thought, hey, this guy's a problem child. But in reality, I wasn't. no one asked me, hey, what's going on? How do you feel?
Right.
What happened here? So
Right, and you established literally from the first chapter that you did this because you really loved the notion of being a cop. You wanted to be a cop. You really wanted to help people,
yes,
and there were many, and you had some successes and some things didn't quite work out.
yeah,
And I just want to remind people the book is called The 52nd.
yes,
If you're a Bronx person, number one, you will appreciate the guy's honesty. he didn't mince words. He doesn't mince words with me, and he's straight and upfront about what he does. But you ultimately, and I was very surprised by the end of the book, you ultimately were given a choice that because they didn't like you or because they felt that you were, I guess, a troublemaker or somewhat unfit because of your personal issues, and they told you to either retire or you will lose your, if you fight it, you'll lose your pension. That's a tough
yes, because
decision to make.
the job itself has a court system, which most of us call it the kangaroo court, and it's like you don't need to be 100% guilty. All you need is 50%, 25% of being guilty, and there it is. I didn't want to risk it to take that to that court, so I took my losses. I got my pension. I lost certain things, certain benefits to go along with it, but that's okay because uh, you know, I believe in this higher being, and God carried me through on the rest of the way.
I thought it was fascinating that you also made it quite clear, and I thought it was a great idea that it should be a high school requirement so that the high school students visit a prison so the kids can see what awaits them. If God forbid they do the wrong thing. I thought that was a really interesting thing. I don't know if it can ever come true. I don't know that.
Well, it did come true in the late '70s, early '80s. They had a program called Scare Straight, and they
Wow.
took kids to these prisons, and it got them straight.
Therapeutic to write the book. We're just about out of time. I want to just remind people the book is called The 52nd. It was good for you to write it. You felt good about writing it,
Yeah, I did. I did.
and you so regrets at this point, or at this point just moving forward with your life and your retirement.
I'll be honest with you, Gary. No regrets. I have fun writing it, and I'm waiting for some good, further good feedbacks, and I'm here to answer any questions in the near future.
Great. Great. I think it's great. I want to recommend it to the people of the Bronx because there's so much talk about crime and stopping crime and who the police officers
Yeah.
are. This is a police officer, a Hispanic police officer, grew up in the Bronx, understands the Bronx, knows who we are, and became a cop and told everything about it. And it was just a fascinating read, really because of its honesty. So, Officer Rivera,
Okay.
thank you so much for
Gary.
for writing a really important piece of work for the people of the Bronx, and of course for joining us in the Bronx Buzz.
Thank you.
Okay, we will say goodnight then, and we appreciate both Luis and Jerry for joining us. And if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be here next week. Good night.